the leading neuroscientists are saying, we have to preserve your brain. Even if you take disease-modifying drugs, you're at high risk of developing early cognitive decline, at high risk of having accelerated brain atrophy.
In addition to your story and your recovery process, a detailed step-by-step protocol that you followed, but that can be helpful not just for patients with the same diagnosis of progressive MS, but potentially for other autoimmune
Correct.
diseases. In fact, you started getting a lot of people writing in saying that they were doing your protocol for things like Parkinson's.
What
are some other examples of chronic diseases or conditions that people had that they were noticing that they were getting significantly better or not declining as fast when they were following your Wahls protocol?
So other autoimmune problems, things like systemic lupus, fibromyalgia, psoriatic arthritis, inflammatory bowel disease, autoimmune thyroid disease. Then we also have other neurologic issues like Parkinson's, mental health issues, anxiety, depression, bipolar, obsessive compulsive disorder. Then we've had myasthenia, diabetes, obesity, heart disease, chronic pain. The VA became so impressed with the work that I was doing in the traumatic brain injury clinic and in the primary care clinic. They asked me to create a clinic that was devoted to doing medicine the way I wanted to do it, and we called it the Therapeutic Lifestyle Clinic. And I went to the pain clinic, I went to primary care. I said, give me your most challenging patients, but they need to know they're not getting drugs from me. We're just going to do diet and lifestyle. And so the most common diagnoses or issues that I was helping people with were pain, brain fog, and mood issues. And they come with a variety of diagnoses. It might be old war injuries. It might be back pain, an autoimmune problem, mental health problem, obesity, diabetes. But the most common symptom that people were troubled with was pain, brain fog, some mood issues, and then, of course, their underlying disease states. And we'd put them basically on the Wahls protocol. I would personalize it to address their issues. We had such success, I ended up having to switch things over to group classes because I wanted to help as many people as possible. We had long waiting lines to get in. And the VA, because it has an electronic medical system, was able to monitor blood pressure, blood sugar use, lab values, and saw that we were consistently improving blood pressure, improving blood sugars, needing fewer drugs. It was really very, very satisfying.
Sometimes I've shared your story. I'm in conversation. I have so many friends, family members that are physicians or in research or in the medical system in some shape or form. Or I'm on vacation somewhere and I'm just chatting with somebody about the work that I do, or I come across somebody who has MS and I'm talking about your story. And oftentimes when somebody is in the space of research or a physician, I can immediately see this sort of, not always, but often, glance of, and then sometimes a comment of, well, there's no evidence. Immediately the jump to, there's no evidence to show that this actually works. And so who knows? This could be just her story. This could be anecdotal. Mm-hmm. And I think the thing that sometimes, well, first of all, you are working on a ton of research and there's research that's out there. We're going to talk about that in a second. But I want to talk about the first part of your story is that I think sometimes people forget that the way that research gets funded, especially when it comes to lifestyle interventions like the research that you're doing, is you shared your story. You did a case study. And that case study turned into the case series.
Turned into a feasibility trial. Turned into randomized controlled trial. Turned into randomized parallel group trial. So yes, there's a definite sequence. It is, people, when I first recovered, my neurologist said, Terry, I get so many calls. I'm so glad you went to see the Cleveland Clinic because people keep accusing me of being incompetent, saying that you couldn't possibly have MS. And I get to say, no, she saw the best center in the country. So she has MS. But then, of course, someone can say that you do prospective clinical trials, and you've gotten very nice results in others as well.
And I want to add one other element to it. You know, you're in this field, you're in this space where you have access to do these trials, the support of the colleagues through you earning that support. But in addition to that, you also based the protocol on first, of course, your own experience, what you were noticing getting better or not, but that was also based on research that was out there.
Oh, absolutely. Now, it's all science-based.
That's all science-based, but you don't have to have a big clinical trial on MS. Not that that's not useful and we want that and that's what you're doing, to begin to make improvements and to see if you notice or a patient notice a difference. You might be working with a doctor who says, look, these are the pros and cons. This is what the research says. These are what the animal models show out there. This is what pathways it's linked to or the core issues that are there. Correct. I think it's worth trying.
And what you always want to be doing is judging the risk of the intervention. How risky is the intervention? So as I was doing things, I was, assessing how worrisome were these supplements. And so I was checking them always against the safety data to verify that they were safe. And then I could make a decision, how risky would it be to go back to a daily meditation? That's pretty safe. How risky was it to do physical therapy every day? Well, I've been doing that for years under my therapist, so that's pretty safe. Adding electrical stimulation, that was under my therapist's direction, so that's pretty safe. Redesigning my paleo diet to stress a more nutrient-dense diet, again, that's pretty safe. A lot of the dietitians will say, when you do a paleo diet, any diet that excludes a whole food groups, puts you at risk for nutrient deficiencies, and that would be terrible for you. So when I wrote these analyses to analyze our diet using rigorous registered dietitian nutrient software. We published it in high-impact registered dietitian nutrition journals, analysis of the Wahls diet, and it's, no surprise, superior to the U.S. governmental dietary guidelines for many, many of the nutrients. And so we've published that, and I update that in my book. So I think it's important for us to be skeptical. I think it's important for us to evaluate carefully these interventions. Are they risky or not? And you can decide, I want to wait for randomized double-blind controlled trials, or you can decide that vegetables are pretty safe, meditation's pretty safe, exercise is pretty safe, supplements supervised by your personal physician is pretty safe. And the other thing that's exciting, Dhru, is when I first started talking about diet and exercise as critical to protecting your brain, the neurology community, and that was back when my TED Talk went viral in 2011, and when my book came out in 2014, they were very upset. Mm. They said, diet has nothing to do with it. You got a terrible disease, eat what you want. But now, the science has caught up. The microbiome research has caught up. The epigenetics research has caught up. And now the leading neuroscientists are saying, we have to preserve your brain. Even if you take disease-modifying drugs, you're at high risk of developing early cognitive decline, at high risk of having accelerated brain atrophy. You need to eat a nutrient-dense diet. You need to do a stress-reducing program. You need to do daily exercise. You should monitor your vitamin D level. You should know your homocysteine status. And you know what? It sounds like they read my book.
The landscape of the conversation has changed.
Has
in
changed
a way,
a lot, yes.
Those same researchers and physicians are thinking a lot more holistically because they understand that every part of the body affects another part of the body. And if we don't keep that in mind, it's not enough to just look at what is this one drug doing to improve this one thing that we're looking at when it comes to this disease, but what are the other aspects? So that leads me to the question of, you were sharing in your story that in addition to things that you were focusing on adding, you also were off of those drugs that were given to you in the beginning. At what point in time in the journey, from the time that you were in a wheelchair, were you off all of those medications?
So in 2007, I started all this stuff. I'm on Cellcept, which is a disease-modifying drug. I'm recovering. I'm walking around. In March, or maybe it was the first week of April, I went to see my neurologist, and I told him that I wanted to go off the disease-modifying drugs. He goes, I think that's fine, Terry. Well, first off, he was stunned when he saw me walk into his office, because the last time he'd seen me, I'd been in the wheelchair looking really bad. So he was thrilled. He got an MRI. He was so disappointed that my MRI had not changed. And then he said, it was probably foolish to think that it would, because those are really old lesions. So the thing is that your brain isn't shrinking. You don't have new lesions. And yes, we should still taper you and take you off those drugs. So we did. And I've been off all disease-modifying drugs since the second week of April. I'm still on gabapentin, although now I'm on a very tiny dose. I've attempted to go entirely off the gabapentin, but my face pain comes back. So I have scarred my spinal cord. So likely I will be on very low dose gabapentin forever, because when that pain comes on, it's so horrific that I'm just like taking 400 milligrams of gabapentin for the rest of my life is like no big deal. I'm happy to do that.
And this brings up the larger point, which is that when people work with, even you're a physician, you were working with your doctors to decide what medications were there. But I'm hearing, and I want to say it back to you, and you correct me if I'm wrong, that a big part of your recovery, in addition to the things that you were doing, was knowing when to get off the drugs in the right order.
Correct. A lot of people reach out and say, I just discovered your protocol. I'm going to stop my drugs.
And that's the wrong answer.
That is absolutely the wrong answer. You implement the protocol, and you may, if you have great response, be able to have a future conversation, say, I'd like to taper and get off my drugs. We don't know what the appropriate time frame is.
It's based on every patient and their process.
And you want to, it depends on your disease. Do you have MS? Do you have lupus? Do you have fibromyalgia? Do you have inflammatory bowel disease? So you need to be monitored for your disease activity, and then things slowly tapered at the time that it's appropriate. And then you need to know that lifestyle, your self-cares are now your potent disease-modifying drugs. And if you, let's say in 2 years, you're feeling so great, you think, I don't need to do this anymore. I'm at my nephew's wedding, and I want to have wedding cakes, so I do. And then I have a severe rebound flare. Your neurologist will say, see, I told you, you can't stop the drugs. And I would say, see, I told you, you can't cheat. Your lifestyle is your disease-modifying therapy. If you stop it, expect a rebound. Just like if you stop your potent disease-modifying drugs, you expect a rebound.
It's almost like a colleague of mine used to say, a functional medicine practitioner, he would say, how strict you are is based on how sick you are. And so in some cases where people have very chronic autoimmune conditions, they really don't have the ability to return back to the way that they were eating before the symptoms got really bad.
Correct. So
this is just their new lifestyle, the way that they're living.
That's the way you live.
A small price to pay for regaining function, brain health, and all of the things that you saw on your own journey.
So my kids, one child has made the observation that migraines are gone as long as they follow the Wahls protocol. Migraines come roaring back if they go back to the standard American diet. And the other doesn't. They feel a little more energetic when they follow the Wahls protocol. It doesn't have a big impact on them. Although even that child has said, they can tell they are migrating more towards following the protocol more completely.
It's fantastic. Quick story that I'm going to jump around a little bit here.
Yeah.
And I want to talk about all the new things that you've incorporated based on what your community has shared with you, what you've seen yourself, that you've incorporated into the new version of the book that's out there. But talk to us about how you went from once being banned by the National MS Society, right? One of the main organizations when it comes to multiple sclerosis. How did you go from being banned by them to then receiving funding from them?
Well, I'm very grateful that they did ban me. Because
and what does a ban look like? Did you receive a plaque in the
Well,
the
what
mail?
I received
So
was
you're
a
banned?
notice from my chief of staff and from the chair of medicine that I had appointments to go meet with them, because I had to explain why I was banned. And that's when I heard that people were complaining about me. And to them. And that's when I got the appointment with the chief of the complementary alternative medicine clinic, which was actually very helpful. I learned how to speak more appropriately in the public and in my medical record, to be sure that I was telling people we're trying to improve cellular physiology and that we want you to work closely with your personal physician so that as your cells work better and you need fewer medications, we can safely wean you away from drugs. So very helpful. And then this is sort of like what happened with the fellow named Barry Marshall, the guy who said H. pylori cause stomach ulcers. He had this theory in 1980, couldn't get his work published. He had to get published in regional, very low impact, almost negative impact journals. And then he worked with a publicist to get an article about him published in the U.S. with a sensational headline, "Guinea Pig Doctor Cures Self of Stomach Ulcers Using Antibiotics." And that was published in the Reader's Digest and in the National Enquirer, which then generated a huge public buzz. Then he started being able to get more funding for his research with philanthropic donors, more rigorous studies, which got into bigger publications. And 25 years later, the guy gets a Nobel Prize in medicine, and he's a millionaire because he's created some patents around the H. pylori theory. For me, I have my recovery 2008, 2009. I finally get my studies underway in 2010, 2011. I have that TEDx talk that goes viral.
And can you share the title of that?
Minding Your Mitochondria.
And you can see it in the show notes if you click below.
It's a great little talk. That goes viral. That gets me my book deal. And so that's getting published. I get a conversation with my chair of medicine and chair of VA, making sure that I'm not overstating my claims. I'm very careful about how I write that book so that people are carefully guided to work closely with their physicians, not stop drugs, vegetables are pretty safe, monitoring your vitamin D levels pretty safe, meditation's pretty safe, exercise supervised by a therapist, again, pretty safe, but work with your personal medical team as you do these things. Book becomes a bestseller. The MS Society monitors their social media platform.
And they're monitoring that. This is before the ban comes in or after?
Oh, the ban happened in 2009.
Okay, and so
before my TED Talk.
Yep.
And before my research.
Yeah, and the ban, before we go to that point where they're monitoring social media, just curious.
Oh, so what
did
that
the ban? What did it mean? And how did it come to you?
The local Iowa City chapter could not let me come speak to them.
Okay, got it.
And other chapters couldn't let me speak to them. But apparently some other chapters figured out how to go around that, because I was speaking 2 chapters on the telephone. And so I don't know how they got around it. I didn't ask. So some local chapters figured out their own local workarounds.
And one more question about that, because I think this is important in the process of doing things the right way, and also that when you are onto something in any industry, whether it's the industry that you're in, and you have an idea that's out there, you will get backlash.
You'll get pushback. And, actually, I'm really grateful that the MS Society banned me, because that led me to my uncomfortable conversations with my chair of medicine,
Sure.
VA chief of staff, that got me educated on a more prudent way of talking about all of this.
For sure. It was a big part of the growth of how to communicate it.
Part of my growth and development, for which I'm very grateful. So
then they were monitoring social media.
So my TED Talk comes out, my book comes out, it's a bestseller. They monitor social media to know what their constituents are talking about. And what happened in 2014, there was a sudden explosion of social media mentions about diet, lifestyle, the Wahls diet, the Wahls protocol, Dr. Terry Wahls, that swamped all of the conversation about disease-modifying therapies combined. So in the summer of 2014, they decided they need to hold a wellness conference. And they tracked me down, get me on the phone to say, we're having this wellness conference, we'd like you to come. And I'm like, well, I would come, but see, I'm a banned speaker, and I don't think I could attend your conferences as a banned speaker. So they were very apologetic, and they said, no, you're not banned, and we really would like you to come.
Did they put it in writing?
And so I came, and so they had 45 people who were scientists, 45 folks who were patient advocates. So I was a twofer. And for the 45 patient advocates, they all had copies of my book. So as we're registering there, I'm signing all these books, and I'm thinking, oh, I'm probably pissing people off, but I'm going to sign these books. And during that conversation, and they had these presentations, and I saw the graph which explained why I was there, that showed the social media mentions before my book came out and after my book came out. It's just boom. I said, so it's apparent to us that our constituents want diet and lifestyle programming and diet and lifestyle research. So that's why this meeting's being convened. Then I kept advocating that we could agree that we don't know the role of gluten, we don't know the role of dairy, but we could surely all agree that sugar is bad and vegetables are good. And the neuroscientists were saying, there's no proof for that. And so
no proof for either or we're saying specifically about sugar
or
no
vegetables.
Okay, got it.
And so my response to that was, yes. I'm not always socially the most skilled. So I stood up and I said, well, if you guys can't be on the side of no to sugar, yes to vegetables, and you don't tell your constituents that and your clinicians that, your constituents will think that you are only on the side of big pharma. Then I got a standing ovation from the 45 members of the audience that were patient advocates, and sort of stony silence from the neuroscientists. And I thought, okay, this is not going well. I should probably behave better. And then we broke out into the diet group, and I kept saying, if you're going to do dietary research, you have to reconstitute the people who are reviewing these studies, because based on the comments I'm getting back from my proposals to you guys, your reviewers know nothing about doing dietary intervention studies.
And just like the neuroscientist who was in the audience who had shared that comment, I've heard Jeffrey Bland say this before. He's considered one of the for those that are listening, he was instrumental in setting up the Institute of Functional Medicine, is considered one of the godfathers of functional medicine, really incredible guy. I've heard him say is that your lack of awareness is not an absence of evidence that's out there. So this individual is saying, there's no proof for that. There's no proof that sugar's bad and vegetables are good. That individual, who I'm guessing was probably a little bit of like a older, not a young doctor, a little bit older.
Actually, they were quite young.
Oh, they were? Okay.
But,
so that's my own stereotype of the situation.
They grew up in the animal model. They grew up in the, we'll steadily process these one biochemical pathway at a time.
Got it.
Life is much more complicated than that.
Life is so much more complicated.
Now, to the MS Society's credit,
yes,
we had this little banquet. Several internal folks came by and said, Terry, we are so rooting for you. We so appreciate what you're doing, shaking up the MS Society. And then I was very pleased to see that they, in fact, did create a handout that reviewed the gluten-free diet, the paleo diet, the swank diet, Mediterranean diet, the evidence, limited evidence, that there was pro and con for all of those diets. By that time, we had one little research paper that came out. Our work had gotten mentioned. They didn't quite have the framework for my diet correct, but they had this out there. So they were finally telling people diet matters, and you should talk to your patients that these diets are out there and that they should consider that. And then I...
versus the standard
Standard
again,
American diet.
which was
It doesn't
what
matter.
you eat, it doesn't matter.
Correct.
And so many people who are listening to this podcast, whether they have gone through breast cancer or something else that's out there or a traumatic brain injury, they often get that standard response, which is that diet doesn't matter. Just eat whatever you want. And
It is
now
so
for
wrong.
the first time, the MS Society, this is a pretty big deal, is saying, actually, we think that diet does matter.
Does matter. So that was 2015. Then they put out a call for dietary research. And so then we wrote a proposal. Now, mind you, at 2010, there were only 2 dietary prospective intervention studies that had ever been done. I was one of the PIs. In 2015, when they put out a call for dietary intervention studies, again, I was one of the few people doing dietary intervention studies. They ended up funding us. They gave us $1 million.
Incredible.
So we launched that in August of 2016.
And when that confirmation came in that you had funding from them, where were you? And like give me the mental state and where were you exactly when you got the news?
Oh, this is wild. So I had just had surgery on my back for spinal stenosis. I was at home going through my email, and I got this email from the MS Society, and it's from Nick LaRocca, and he said, "Terry, give me a call." So I called him, and he said, "Well, here, this is blah, blah, blah." He gave me the news, and so I was like, "Wow." Called my staff, said, "Okay, this is what's happening," and then we ended up getting everything lined up and started enrolling participants in August of 2016.
Wow. A full circle moment to being banned.
To being
to
banned.
getting $1 million check.
To getting $1 million
to do
check.
funding that has the ability to change people's lives.
And the other thing that is immensely satisfying. So in 2010, there were 2 people doing dietary intervention studies for MS. Now in 2020, 10 years later, there are 13 dietary intervention studies, and I'm involved in 5 of the 13.
Incredible.
So we've made huge progress, and that progress is really driven by the public, because it was the public's response to my TED Talk, to my book, that drove the MS Society to create the funding initiative, which then allowed for all these little pilot studies to be underway, which are allowing for larger studies funded by the NIH. The public is the big driver.
The public and the ability of, often in this landscape, social media sometimes gets negative connotation, but it's really through the power of social media, people sharing your TED Talk, being able to share their own patient testimonials online, on Twitter, on Facebook, on Instagram,
Correct.
And saying that, guys, I've been doing this, and I'm not crazy, I'm getting better, or I'm not getting as worse as I was.
Or, the people that we have who say they tried the drugs, and then they lost their insurance, lost their job, couldn't afford the drugs. So now this well, that's all I've got. So I'm going to do diet and lifestyle. But now, since it's all I've got, I'm actually going to do it 100%. And they're contacting us saying, "Oh my God, my life's been transformed. My pain is gone. My vision is better. My hands are working better. I can walk better." Time and time again, we hear that. People they're using these potent drugs. They finally can't work, have to go off the drugs because now they can't afford them. And now they realize, it's all I've got is diet and lifestyle. And they finally actually do it. Now, the Wahls protocol doesn't work at 70% or 80% or 90%. You got to actually do the whole, really implement the dietary choices.
It's a central portion of it. Before we get into some of the new things you've added into the book and the learnings that have been there for the last few years since publishing it and the TED Talk, talk about the research landscape from here on. What's coming up and what's your hope and your dream? You never know who's listening to this podcast, of what you'd like to see funded.
So the big question is, if I'm newly diagnosed, I'm terrified about my disease, the neurologist is trying to tell me I have to take these terrible drugs so I don't become profoundly disabled. I'd like to know, could I just do diet and lifestyle and not take the drugs? We don't have any studies that compare the two, controlled or randomized. So doing that study will be profoundly helpful. Now, I have funds to do a small study. Getting funds so we can make that study much larger would be, of course, excellent. But
And what does it take to fund something like that with all your experience? Like,
oh, this is millions of dollars.
Yeah.
Because what you're doing is you're hiring staff to train and support people to implement the diet and lifestyle. You are adding MRIs at the beginning, at the end. We're adding all these biomarkers and then blinded assessments. And then you want to be able to bring people in for the control arm who are getting usual care. And we're not supporting them with diet and lifestyle. And ideally, you'd like to have a couple hundred people in that study.
right.
So, because you'd like to power it with enough people so you can clearly answer, what happens if you don't take drugs? And it may be that, taking drugs plus doing diet and lifestyle is better. Or it may be that not taking drugs and doing diet and lifestyle is better. We really don't know. But that would be a incredible study to answer. With the funding I do have, we can do a small study with just diet and lifestyle compared to control. So we can begin to get the safety numbers to know, am I creating harm by letting people do diet and lifestyle without the drugs?
Right. From the point of diagnosis, is there a difference in terms of the intervention of just going straight to lifestyle and all the interventions in the Wahls protocol?
Correct.
Or, going into traditional
drugs plus lifestyle. That's a very compelling question. We get a lot of questions about that. I would like to know that answer. And I'm very transparent. We don't know that answer. That's why this next study is so important. The other studies that we're doing, and we're writing grants for it, is to develop the animal model to study the Wahls protocol in little mice, so you can compare doing the little drugs to doing diet and lifestyle. So we're in that process of creating the mouse chow that goes with that and designing those studies. Because another reason that my colleagues are more comfortable with drugs is they have the mouse model that explains all the mechanisms. So this is very rare that you get to see that an intervention works in humans, and we haven't worked out through millions and millions and billions of dollars worth of research in the animals to know what are the precise molecular pathways that are involved. And again, this is part of what is so exciting being at the university. I have my scientific colleagues, basic scientists, who are like, Terry, this is so exciting to be able to be part of your research team, to begin to elucidate the mechanistic pathways that are responsible for the transformations you're seeing in clinic.
Because of what you're seeing in your own story, and from a lot of anecdotal stories that people are writing in, and from the early research that you've done out there, if that continues to hold true at bigger and bigger levels in these studies that you want to do, it fundamentally changes
everything.
The approach of all, not just autoimmune diseases, but the thinking for other chronic diseases too.
And we did have the presence of mind to freeze biospecimens for all of my studies. So I have a freezer full of biospecimens. And again, if we had more donors coming in, we could go back to my freezer with my basic science colleagues and then pay for the analyses to look at these molecular pathways, the changes in gene expression, the changes in the metabolome, the changes in epigenetics. So, yes.
Powerful
stuff.
Powerful stuff.
It's hard to sleep at night. It's so exciting.
I know. Incredibly exciting. Talk to me about some of the new things that you've put in the paperback version of the book. It's the same foundational protocol that's there.
Yes.
And you've added a lot of new insights based on the learnings.
Well, the first thing to the functional medicine colleagues that are listening out there, the reason that our patients don't get better sometimes is usually not because I didn't order the right test or the right supplement. It's because my patients struggled with implementing the
protocol in the first place.
The protocol. It's really hard to implement diet and lifestyle changes. And so I've done a lot of work with health behavior change from my experience in the VA, where I'm helping people who are severely disabled living on food stamps, how to help them be successful. So there's a lot more in here about how to successfully help people adopt and sustain behavioral change, and including for people who are living on food stamps, so that very, very, very
and
important.
accessibility is a huge,
Correct.
huge issue because often it's thought of as these interventions are just so expensive.
The inventions are expensive. The testing is expensive. You can only do this if you could have a Whole Foods. You can only do this if you can only get organic foods. And so I walk through that, and I remind people that my patients at the VA were living on food stamps.
What's one of the
And
biggest...
they were living in rural Iowa, having to go to this little small, dinky rural grocery stores. So, yes, if you can do strictly organic, you'll recover more quickly, but you can still recover living on food stamps.
For people who do have limited funds,
Yes.
are on Social Security or food stamps, don't have that accessibility that maybe some individuals have.
Yeah.
What was one of the biggest things you added into the book to help them implement the program?
So we talk about you do the best you can given the resources that you have. You have to learn how to begin cooking.
That's fundamental.
We have to have you to begin cooking at home, doing things like making a menu, making a grocery list, shopping, planning for leftovers, so that you're using all of your resources and you're not wasting things. Then we talk about things that are easier to begin, meditation and mindfulness, and doing that, how to improve your vagal tone, to get in that parasympathetic state where we do more of our digest and repair in maintenance phase.
One thing that I saw you do right before we started is you did a quick gargle. Was that part
Yes.
of activating the
Yes.
vagal?
We want to gargle.
Yeah. Talk to us about gargling.
So gargling.
Which my grandmother, I come from like Indian tradition, Ayurveda,
Yes.
like she was so big on like, oh, you should gargle each morning. And, you know, she didn't have the tools or resources or the research to be explaining why. She just knew that her grandmother had taught her that and how it was a great way to start the day. And not just saltwater gargles when you're sick or your throat is acting up, but as like a way to activate in the morning.
Right. You gargle to activate your vagal nerve. And you can sing, you can hum, you can do voice training, you could do chants, you could do breath work, an exhalation that's 2 to 3 times as long as your inhalation. You could do labyrinth walking, diaphragmatic breathing. You could do a gentle neck massage, range of motion. All of these things are very nice vagal tone activators.
In the case of you gargling right before the interview, is it sort of to put you in a place of just rest and relax before you're on camera and talking?
Yes. You want to have your voice calm. You want to have your throat calm. And I like to get into that more vagal activated state. It's a great thing to do before your meals. Chewing your food. Chewing your food, having bitters, eating something that's bitter before your meal. All these things, very good for vagal tone.
In addition to the accessibility, what are some other things? As you were mentioning earlier in the interview, the research has come so far in the last few years, even since you've published your book. What are some additional items you felt more comfortable recommending, where in the beginning it was like, okay, we know vegetables are good. We know this, it was like more politically correct based on the learnings and the research that was out there. What's something that you felt like, okay, I can really go all in on this recommendation because now the science is a lot clearer?
So Hormesis, ketogenic eating, fasting.
Mm-hmm.
So we talked, I talked about, and I had 3 levels to my diet: an easy introductory level, the Wahls diet, then the next level, Wahls Paleo, which is basically the diet that we investigate, and then a ketogenic version of my diet. Now I've made several nuances with variations in the ketogenic diet. So for those who have to avoid saturated fat, we have a olive oil version. And then we talk about fasting, the various ways that you can fast, that you can get into ketosis without being in a high-fat diet. And we talk about the benefits of extended fast, prolonged fast. I talk about the fact that I like to time restrict. I'll eat typically 1 meal a day. And then a week out of every month, I will do either a calorie-restricted fast or a water-only fast.
So on a day like today where you're in Los Angeles, you're visiting, and you have different interviews and things like that, you drink, a little bit of tea. Have you eaten today? And will you eat later on? So today is just
Today's fasting.
Today's fasting. And did you plan it that way?
Yes.
And what do you notice for yourself on days that you fast like this on a regular basis?
Well, if I did this for 5 days, 7 days, I'll be pretty hungry by the 5th and 7th day.
Yeah.
For the first 2 days, it's very energizing.
Yeah.
Eating and digesting your food requires, it's a lot of work metabolically to digest your food. And so paradoxically, in the first 1 to 2 days, the first few times you do this, it is not easy. But after you've been fasting more consistently, you may find that it's quite energizing.
And give us the science pitch on fasting. We've talked about fasting in a lot of episodes. We've done a couple episodes on fasting, but in the context here, where there may be listeners that hadn't heard that, give us the elevator pitch on the science of fasting. So
this has to do with something called hormesis. If you have intermittent mild stress from which your body can recover and repair, that will give you the chemical signals to improve the efficiency and effectiveness of how your cells run the chemistry of life. So your ancestral mother and father, thousands of generations ago, would intermittently have captured their game by being an endurance hunter and depleting their glycogen stores. Or they had a terrible hunt and didn't have any food for a few days and depleted their glycogen stores. And if they didn't have the machinery to tolerate that well, they probably did not have reproductive success. So hardwired in all of us is that resilience to tolerate intermittent stress from glycogen being depletion. So being in ketosis. But you have to be able to repair from that stress. It turns out being in stress from cold, mild heat, that's also really good for us. Our bones are built, our muscles are built from mild stress. If there's no gravity, your bones dissolve, they disappear. If your muscles don't do any work, they disappear because they're a very expensive resource for us, our bones and our muscles and our brain. So we'll replace it with fat. We'll make it go away if we aren't using it. So we have to use these things, and you have to stress them. But then you need to have enough recovery time to repair the damage that would have occurred from that mild stress that gave you the signals to build a stronger bone, a stronger muscle, a more resilient mind.
It's incredible, and there's so much more research that's out there, even in the last 5 years, than was there previously. And bottom line, we weren't designed to eat 3 meals a day all the time.
And we're not designed to be comfortable.
We're not designed to be comfortable.
We're designed to have things be difficult. Now, none of us wants to give up all of our comforts, but it does mean that we benefit greatly from intermittent mild stress.
I was recently visiting a vineyard, an organic vineyard, and they were just taking us through the basics of how to make strong grapes. And they were like, look, in a way, we have to stress these vines out. We can't give them all the water that they want. We can't grow the biggest fruits that are out there. If we want really great grapes and strong grapes that can withstand disease and other aspects, we have to limit certain things like water and other exposures, and we don't want the plants to get lazy. Because when they get lazy, they produce more grapes, but those grapes are bad quality and they're more disease prone. Correct. And we're the same.
I've been reading a lot more about evolutionary biology. And I think that's one of the things that I brought to functional medicine is my interest in evolutionary biology, ancestral health principles, and functional medicine.
Yeah, because you didn't see functional medicine talking as much about paleo, for example.
Correct.
They would talk a lot about like the Mediterranean diet. And I thank you for that. Right?
Yeah.
And a lot of the doctors that I would say that were most progressive, or some of the younger folks, would say, look, IFM is great and you'll understand all the pathways. You'll understand exactly what happens. You'll understand the gut microbiome. But in terms of the recommendations, we've gone so much further than what's available to us out there. And thank you for bringing that into the world and introducing that conversation.
Correct. And as I evaluate things, I now do it through the lens of evolutionary biology. And I think about, do we have evidence from our ancestral mothers and fathers that have used these concepts, these principles in the past? And if we do, then I'm much more comfortable with experimenting this or considering that this is an area that we should investigate and actually get my basic science colleagues at Iowa thinking more along the evolutionary biology principles as well. And then I think about the behavior psychology, how to get people to, because we're wired to enjoy pleasure. We're wired to enjoy today's pleasure over tomorrow's benefit, and we're wired to enjoy comfort. And so that's part of why behavior change is so incredibly difficult. So again, thinking about all of that to help people and help clinicians figure out how to help their patients be more successful with foregoing today's pleasure and being willing to value tomorrow's benefit.
What do you think is one of the biggest tips that you could bring in for somebody that feels like they've tried different programs or has had a challenge in implementing kind of any health program out there or wants to consider doing the Wahls protocol? What can support them in the process of implementing and tapping into behavior change so that they can actually succeed in the program?
I learned this one from my vets, and that is understand what you want your health for. You have a clear understanding of your mission and purpose in life. Have a big, hairy, audacious goal, because we're asking you to do something that's difficult. And so to be willing to take on something that's difficult, it's helpful for you to have a clear mission, a clear purpose, a big goal. And so, for some of my vets, it might have been, I want to dance with my son or daughter at their wedding. I want to walk again. And so once we get their goal, then I can break down to, okay, now we can talk about what's the little small next micro commitment towards getting you a little bit closer to that big goal. And then we talk about addiction, that a lot of our food dietary issues are tied into cravings and addictions. So there are things that a functional medicine doc can do to help you lower the suffering from addiction. So we can do those kinds of things. And then if I'm thinking behavior change, if you remember the marshmallow experiment with kids, you put a marshmallow in front of them. Can you not eat the marshmallow?
Resilience, and can you wait and defer gratification?
If you got it out of the kids' line of sight, they could double how long they could wait before eating the marshmallow. So that means we have to help people create an environment where success is easier and failure is harder. And again, that's all in my chapters on behavior change. How to make it easier for you to succeed, harder for you to fail. There are a bunch of things that you can do to help, and there are a bunch of things that your family and your friends and your physician can do to help you.
How important is community as part of that process?
Again, this is what I learned from my vets. I thought all that one-on-one time with me would make the difference. Well, golly gee, it's the one-on-one time with your peers in community that is so powerful. Behavior change is much more effective with peer mentors, peer support. It's very much like the Alcoholics Anonymous model. That peer support, that sponsor, was very effective for them. And it's really quite effective in health behavior change as well.
Hi, everyone. If you liked this interview with my friend Dr. Terry Wahls, you're going to love this interview with Dr. Jason Fung on the new science of why we get cancer.
All that programming in that single-celled organism to grow, to move around, to become immortal, that's all there. That was never in evolutionary time. That was